Good morning, everyone, or actually, it's afternoon where y'all are. I'm in Austin, Texas, but we are so excited to be with you here today. I am Kristin Bonds. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Mercedes. I'm actually normally based in Philadelphia, so y'all might see me around, but I'm currently in Denver, Colorado, and my pronouns are also she, her.
And we are career tech recruiters who have often been slated into that DEI recruiter role at all of the tech companies that we've worked for in our careers. Probably most likely because we're women of color, but also because of that, we have spent our entire careers building recruiting pipelines, referral networks, and speaking with candidates of all kinds to build world-class teams. When we launched our consultancy business, Heristic, focusing on building inclusive culture and talent infrastructure for like growth stage companies, we knew that the most effective way to build these things was to center DEI practices in the DNA of every single thing that you build, especially recruiting. And because of that, we also understand how much more goes into the concept of DEI recruiting from an organizational perspective than just what's happening in your talent acquisition team. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about here today. And if you're here, we expect that you'll want to hear more about how to build effective talent acquisition strategies to increase diversity in your organizations. And we'll share with you what we believe to be the most important efforts that you can do to do that work. And everything we see in the chat says that that's why you're here. So we're excited to chat with you.
Awesome. So just a quick reminder, we did ask that you could grab your organization mission, vision, values, any kind of statements or guiding principles that you might have that defines who your organization is or like the vibe that y'all have got going on. So let's go ahead and dive in and let's all go ahead and switch sides. Thank you. Let's go ahead and get on the same page and get an idea of what to expect for today's workshop. First, we're going to begin with why diversity recruiting doesn't really begin or end with building pipelines or diversity initiative. It actually starts with your culture. And we're really going to dive deep into how you can improve your organization's talent acquisitions capabilities with an intentional and well-designed workplace culture. Then we're going to move into how you can start building your diversity recruitment strategy today in a way that genuinely attracts and engaged underrepresented prospects. And then finally, we'll wrap up by touching on how you'll be able to utilize your workforce after this workshop to reach your goals. And in that will include how to use authentic storytelling in your recruitment marketing, and also how to engage your workforce to support your diversity recruitment efforts. So to get started, we're going to start with a quick poll question. If you can set that up for us, Deborah. Perfect. So you'll have this pop up on your screen, but we'll essentially just give you 30 seconds so we can get a read on who is here with us today, but first understanding your comfort level with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
All right. Well, it looks like the biggest chunk here is that people are fairly confident between what these different terms are. And what I'll say is that's wonderful. It's great that we have like a little bit of understanding. We're not totally starting from zero, but just to be certain that we're all on the same page, we're going to drop in the chat our distinctions and how we define these terms for reference. That way you can use them the rest of the conversation today. And keep in mind, these are just like heuristic Mercedes and I's definitions of these words, but we've done a lot of research to try to understand it and explain them as clear as we can. And having a clear understanding of the nuances between these terms is really fundamental for leaders and employees, and understanding how to use these words to speak with each other and understanding the income or the outcomes and impacts that they have will only enable you to be able to develop talent solutions better. So we've dropped in here our definitions for these words. And I'll just briefly touch on them. It's more of like a process in our definition than like three separate words. So diversity is more like the understanding of the representation inside of your organization. Equity is more about building support and allocating resources to achieve fair outcomes for all the different people in your organization. And inclusion is that daily practice of what you can do, actual actions that can achieve the outcome. And the outcome we're usually talking about here is belonging. So another way to visualize this practice here is diversity is the understanding, inclusion is the action, and belonging is the result. And at Heuristic, we do take that even one step further. And our acronym that we always use is ABIDE, where we put the word action in front of all of the rest of the words to show that action and intention is how we're going to get to all of the outcomes afterwards. All right, I want to ask y'all, since I just dropped all of our definitions on you, does anyone have any other definitions or understandings of the words that you like to use? Please drop them in the chat, or any other questions. I want to just take a second here to pause on these words since we're going to be using them a lot in the next 30 or so minutes. Anyone have anything else they'd like to share about these words? If not, that's okay. We'll keep going. So if you could move to the next slide for me. You might be excited to hear us kind of dive right into specific recruiting topics today, but we're actually going to start a little bit earlier with the foundation for just about everything inside of your organization, which is your culture, your vision, and your values. And that's why we asked you to bring those with you today. As leaders and key decision makers in your organizations, and even if you're not a leader or decision maker, it's still a great reference point to be able to speak clearly about what your culture and values are in your org. And we're going to use that to build foundation for building a diverse workforce strategy today. So it's our understanding that some of you may have attended other sessions from this great organization that have touched on some of these topics, like creating a culture of belonging and mitigating bias. What we're going to do is we're going to apply that knowledge that you might have as we build a DEI recruiting strategy. And we'll go a little bit further than saying you should do this, because we actually believe it's your obligation and responsibility to do so if you're a leader in your organization, and your responsibility to your community. Too often, diversity recruiting basics are simply, where do we find the diverse pipelines? How can I tap into that? But focusing just on those topics will not actually sustain a diverse workforce moving forward, which is what we actually want to do. So imagine for a moment, like you're a farmer and you're only focusing your efforts on finding the rarest, most delicious, most colorful seeds, but you don't spend any time at all cultivating your soil for when you plant them so that they will grow. I tell you that metaphor there to encourage you that the most important thing that we're going to take away here today is intentionality in developing your DEI strategy. Intentionally ingrain these concepts into your organization's culture rather than just trying to sprinkle diversity recruiting strategies on the end as an afterthought. That's going to actually affect your TA strategy to be effective. And this is what's required in order for it to be a bedrock piece of your foundation. So it all starts with your mission and values. And if your organization hasn't created these things yet, we would strongly recommend that you do. We'll save that for another session. But you need this to be the North Star guiding your strategy around just about all decision making. And so even if you only have just a few ideas around what your mission statement could be or what your values might be once they're finalized, we're going to lead you through an exercise now to ensure that these foundations are inclusive and how you can use them to set up everything that comes later in your DEI recruiting strategy. So let's dive in to see how your organization is built. Is it built the right way to nurture and grow talent of all types? And one note, I'm dumping a lot of stuff on you. If you're already feeling overwhelmed, that's totally okay. We built this workshop to try to reach anyone who's at any point in their journey of understanding on these topics and still come away with some actionable ideas about how to reach more diverse talent. And always you can reach out for questions at any point. So please drop questions in the chat. Here's our next poll question, our workbook question to get us started. So what we'll ask you to do is to walk through this exercise with us, if you don't mind, to go through these concepts. I really hope that you'll actually write things down, because I think it'll work best if you do, and every piece builds on the last. So here's our first question. And we'd like for you to answer of this poll question of, does your organization have guiding statements or values that promote or reinforce diversity? All right. It looks like the majority do, which is awesome. I am so happy to hear that. That shows momentum in DEI work. And we'll talk about why setting that foundation is important. And then the real work comes later, building on top of that. One quick thing I'll do here is, Mercedes, would you mind dropping Heuristic's values and mission statement in just for reference? And if anybody else wants to drop the mission statement or the values of their organization into the chat to share, I think it will be really useful. Like, it's very inspiring to read other people's statements and what people have chosen for their core values. So if you want to, feel free to drop in there. There's like a great way to like learn from each other. And anyways, I'll just pass this off to Mercedes, talking about why these guiding principles are really important. And we'll keep reading what's happening in the chat.
Nice. Awesome. Deborah, could you go ahead and switch slides for us? So as you guys are going through and writing your mission and your values in the chat and highlighting any aspect of your mission and values that highlight and center inclusion and diversity, I want to talk about why we even care whether your organization's guiding statements promote and reinforce diversity. The reason is really foundational to the work of recruiting through a DEI lens. And so really understanding the why behind this is super important. We believe that in order to adequately demonstrate your commitment, your organization's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it's vital that these concepts are really embedded in the guiding principles of your organization. This is how decisions are made, how leadership is chosen, how people are reviewed, and to ensure that your organization is going beyond the we want a diverse workforce to we value and we center our diverse workforce. That's a completely different tone, and it can be felt and seen by your employees, your consumers and clients, your vendors, and even external stakeholders. So further promoting and enforcing diversity through your organization's guiding statements really establishes this common language, which everyone will then use to discuss at the company level and org-wide. It's the foundations to getting this buy-in to doing the work and furthering equity, inclusion, and belonging within your organizations. Below, we've included a couple of steps to get you started in order to make sure the organization's foundations are suitable for a diverse and equitable workforce. And I know that this first point may not necessarily land with this particular audience because most of y'all have established companies. But if you're a serial entrepreneur or you may just be getting started, I want to tell you this. Really, you need to build diversity proactively into the bedrock of your organization. And you can do that by creating it in the inception of your business. It'll make your life a lot easier in the long run. For the rest of the group, especially those that answered no in the last poll question, it may be time to assess and refine your guiding statements and core values to reflect your organization's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. Once you've done that, you can move into this third step where you'll want to share and promote your commitment and create systems of accountability for your guiding principles. It's only by sharing and reiterating this across your organization's external stakeholders that you're actually going to be able to build a system of accountability. But it really, it is a foundational step in order to build that system. And then finally, we want to ensure that you're not just talking the talk, but you're walking the walk too. So you need to make sure that you're measuring yourself. And I want to clearly say that it's regularly measuring your promise and your commitment to your mission values. You should be able to always answer questions like, are you really living up to what it is and who it is that your organization say you are? Do your employees inherently believe in your promise? And then do they actually feel and experience in the workplace? Great, so moving back to the worksheet, if we pull up the next slide, I want you guys to take a moment and brainstorm, moving back into the diversity representation type mindset, but brainstorm which underrepresented groups or demographic categories are currently being represented and measured in your organization. I want you to think about, who is it that you're currently tracking, and then in that, I want you to think about where are the gaps in demographics collected that could further support your organization's goals of more diversity. For instance, we all know the census check boxes of race, ethnicity, age, gender, so on and so forth. We want you to think outside the census boxes when you're thinking about those gaps to discover like really where those might where those gaps might lie. So I'm going to pause for about 30-40 seconds, and then for you guys to write down those answers on your worksheet. Feel free to share with everybody if you want to. But yeah, we'll just give you a couple moments to write those down. Okay, great. Now that we've had a moment to think about, our representation in those gaps, can we move on to the next poll real quick, Deborah? Awesome. So you're going to have this pop up on your screen in just a moment. When thinking about the groups or demographics that are represented and measured in your organization, I want to get a quick read. How many different groups were y'all able to say that your organization recognized? I will say there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just to get a gauge on, how we can think about representation outside those census boxes.
All right. This is great. I like to see higher numbers to like skew toward sort of higher. But let's talk about why. Why does knowing representation in your organization matter? If you could go to the next slide. You can't change anything that you don't measure. Heuristic kind of lives and breathes by this. And if you're only recognizing a few groups, you might actually be doing a little bit of a disservice to the other groups and to the intersectionality of people's identities. So we believe that the more groups you recognize, the higher your chances of building inclusion intentionally for someone who might identify with that group. And knowing who is in your organization and where those gaps are ensures that you're addressing employee morale and satisfaction by providing for the needs of even your most marginalized employee. So this in turn creates the chances and increases your chances of likelihood for these populations that will be attracted and then inclined to stay with your organization. And we may already all know this, everyone who was on the call, but to be clear, the business case for diversity in the workforce is very, very clear. It results in more innovation, more profit, you're better attuned to your customer needs. And that's why we're thinking about it here in terms of hiring, because it will matter for the longevity of business. So with this in mind, here's a few steps on where to start when you're talking about representation. It is the heuristic way to be extremely data-driven and goal-oriented. And so we're always going to beat this horse all the way dead. So it's imperative that your organization is collecting as much self-identification demographic information on your employees as possible without bothering your employees so much that they don't want to participate in that knowledge gathering. The best way to do that is to always communicate what your intentions are with the data that you're asking for, and then show them quickly and exactly how you're going to use it. But in addition to like the key demographics that you're used to, like the census things that Mercedes were talking about, like gender and race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, there's some other groups that you might want to consider. So I want to immediately call out folks with disabilities. A lot of folks overlook these folks. I think someone mentioned that in the chat. That always needs to be top of mind. Focusing on your veteran population. Another example is we really came into a lot more knowledge on the folks in your communities or in your workspaces that have caregiving or parental responsibilities, how big that burden actually is when we all had to go home to work for a while. I'd also encourage you to focus on neurodiverse populations and all of these different ways of categorizing your demographics to better understand what's actually going on and who these people are, what their issues and struggles might be. Next, I think it's important to set admirable goals around where your representation data can be. And we often suggest that you start this by reflecting on your community's publicly available demographic data. You can always look up what your demographics are in your city, and then considering who your customer base is as well, and consider the diversity and the demographics of your vendors, all the folks that interact with your organization at all levels. Those are all ways to increase the representation of the folks that you have in your community. And then when you have all of this, armed with all this data, you can identify gaps for underrepresented groups in your organization and develop strategies to meet and address those gaps. So this may include developing strategic community partners that get you access to more folks like this that you might want to hire, developing apprenticeship or internship opportunities, revisiting universities or organizations where your organization can promote itself to build a reputation to address your representation issues. Mercedes, what's our next workbook question?
Just kidding, was muted. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and move back into the worksheet. I want you all to take a moment and write down, like, as you think about representation in your organization, what efforts are your organizations creating to or making to create this inclusive work environment for these diverse groups? Think outside the box. These can be policies, celebrations, specific benefits, things like, making Juneteenth a holiday or recognizing Holly, providing paternity leave. And even something as simple as changing the words in internal communications to say things like spouse or partner versus husband or wife to be more inclusive. I'm quite interested in all the unique ways y'all are coming up with to create these inclusive environments for different diverse groups. So if you want, go ahead and share some of those in the comments, and let's see all the unique ways that we're going about making an inclusive environment for a diverse workforce. Oh, wow. Very cool. What about everyone else? Are there any other initiatives or efforts anybody would like to bring up? Okay, we're working on inclusive language, guys, that replaces many outdated terms like preferred pronouns with some better options. I love that. That is a really interesting policy around, building inclusive language in your organization and really having something that people can point to. We'll get through this time and time again, but in order to really implement all of these philosophies into your organizations, you really have to have it written down, have something that people can point to and see. So. Great. So we'll go ahead and move forward and really answer like why all of this matters. Lots of great ideas we've seen are being dropped into the chat, and it makes me think that or it makes me want to say that, like, we all might know this, maybe and maybe not, but inclusion is really like the secret sauce to diversity recruitment efforts. Intentionally creating inclusion is like the public demonstration of your commitment to your people, and it's like where you're putting your money where your mouth is. Similar to Disneyland, where, you know, experiences feel magical and organic, there's actually a lot of work that goes behind creating that feeling behind the scenes to make it feel and make your experience experience that way. So we want your workplaces to be something like Disneyland, magical, harmonious, whatever adjective you want to use to describe it. But if systems of fostering inclusion aren't in place, your diverse talent really may not find the environment welcoming, and prevent them from leaving your organization. So where to start? The first thing we encourage you all to do in beginning your journey to inclusivity is starting with an operational and cultural audit, where you can review how you're creating an inclusive workplace by taking a look at the formal and informal processes and systems that exist within your organization. I say formal and informal because I think about this in terms of tangible, intangible, monetary, and non-monetary. So when you're looking at inclusion, tangible may be looking for, you know, points of bias within your talent acquisition funnel where underrepresented groups are being eliminated. And intangible may be checking your workforce for a sense of belonging and looking at that information across demographics. A monetary example could be looking at, you know, auditing your compensation packages and benefits, or even moving towards pay transparency. And then a non-monetary would be something as simple as reviewing and auditing your performance management system to ensure that, you know, managers are unbiased in their evaluations of promotions, and that everyone's getting an equitable, you know, performance management experience. So next, once you've audited, you have an understanding of what might need to be recalibrated or codified in your culture in order to mitigate bias. We also want you to create systems where, you know, vocalize where people can vocalize inequities. We like to call that speak up culture, and also promote inclusion. Once you've got all that in place, it is essentially time to create those informal reinforcements to daily behaviors and informal support for all types of people. And this is really the concept of the top down, middle out, where like you ensure your DEI strategy and your recruitment through a DEI lens is coming to life by disseminating this culture from leadership to middle managers out through your employees. And finally, once you have that codified and an informal culture coming together, you can create an explicit employee value proposition, which is essentially your promise to internal and external, you know, potential employees on what they can expect in your work environment. Once you create that, you promote it internally and externally, and that can then showcase and celebrate the good work that your organization is doing to create a diverse and equitable and inclusive workforce.
Yeah.
Great.
So, yeah, Mercedes just talked about all of these like great intentional like ideas and strategies that you can push forward. And alongside all of that, the intentional creation of these like systems, just as important are reinforcing behaviors. And so I wanted to move to the next workbook question and ask, how does your organization reward behaviors that foster inclusion and belonging? And are there any consequences if these behaviors are not met? So would you take a moment and write those down on your worksheet? All right. I hope you have a couple of things there. And I know it might seem a little bit formal to like write these things down. If you go to the next slide for us, Deborah, building accountability into the practice of inclusion with checks and balances like this is actually a really key step to enforcing and reinforcing the work. And this might be a little bit relevant for the folks on the call who aren't like HR decision makers or key, leadership stakeholders. It's actually the responsibility of every person in your organization to provide psychological safety for everyone around them. And so that's why formalizing some of these things and providing this structure allows for top-down complete organizational buy-in from all the way from the top to every single employee to reinforce this. And to give you some ideas about like how to get started to making this part of your culture, review your culture and values to explicitly establish the behaviors you want to see in the workplace. In other words, be pretty clear about defining the actions that bring your values and culture to life. Y'all have written such amazing things about in your culture, the different kinds of behaviors you want to see. But to reinforce that on kind of a daily basis, how can you mention it in your all hands and like call it out every single day where you see it to make sure that's becoming the actual culture of your organization? We also want to make sure that the leaders at all levels are totally bought into this in their demonstration of upholding this culture. That's where we need to codify these rewards and consequence systems. And you often see that in places like codes of conduct or on like wiki pages and intranet pages. The goal there is basically to incorporate formal and rewards and consequences long-term into your performance management. So sometimes what I'll see is a company that's beginning out in the organization, when they first do a performance management cycle, they will not really talk about their values. And then later on, they'll actually put upholding your values and demonstrating your values as a measure of being formally evaluated annually. And that's like what you want to see, because that becomes ingrained in the culture. And once it's normalized, it's not strange anymore. So I'd like to ask a quick poll question to everyone now. If we can move to the next one, what percentage of the employees do you think in your organization are bought in and furthering the DEI work? And this is our last poll question, by the way. I hope that you can answer honestly. All right. Well, I like to see this. I like to see that it's more than just a handful of folks across most of your responses, all of the responses. But I do think it's important to like call out that there's always a few louder voices around inclusion, but it really does take the whole village to effectively centralize this type of work into your culture. So we're going to dive into some strategies here for engaging more people into this work. But we would like to hear some of your ideas first, and I think it's a good idea to write this down. Our next and last workbook question here is talking about how does your organization engage its people in DEI work? So if you would switch back to the worksheet. And if anybody wants to drop some ideas in the chat, this is probably the most fun part. And like, we love to hear everybody's unique ideas that have developed in all of your orphan organizations about how you encourage people to participate in this type of work. And just one other note about encouragement. That's something that every single person can do regardless of their level or tenure in the organization.
I think celebration is a really key way to encourage people to participate in engaging in diversity, equity, inclusion work. But education is also another good way of doing it. Does anybody have any fun ways in which they educate their workforce on diversity? Go ahead and drop that into the box, and I'll let you all continue to think about this a little bit as we shift gears into the next slide, and really talking about why engaging your people really matters. You know, statistically speaking, people experience more diversity in the workforce than they do anywhere else in their lives. And so, or sorry, in the workplace than they do any other place in their life, meaning, you know, their communities, their neighborhoods, their churches, their sporting, you know, activities, things of that sort. So it's often this collective yet unspoken agreement to sustain and grow upon the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and that action and accountability piece. That is crucial to making these principles, these concepts a foundational piece of your organization. And it's only by engaging your people and with this, you know, org-wide buy-in that any recruitment strategy that you develop will become a reinforcement to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is essentially allowing for a cohesive and effective diversity recruitment strategy. It's one of those pieces that you need that is going to not just enhance your recruitment efforts, your diversity recruitment efforts in particular, but it's what makes it feel genuine and authentic and non-performative. So a couple of things that we can do in order to move towards engaging your workforce. The first thing is, like, even in order to like start gaining buy-in and engaging folks, it's really necessary to have a definitive promise for diversity, equity, inclusion that you can share and refer to internally and externally. This may be in the form of your mission statement or perhaps a specific initiative that you'll have ongoing. But having something tangible to point to, regardless of its form, really highlights the thought and the effort that has gone into your goals and establishing a common language to use org-wide, and really creates an accountability stopgap. Once you have this tangible thing that you're moving towards, or goal that you're trying to achieve, you need to share that message with employees as well as external stakeholders through a well thought out and intentional communications campaign. Once you have this campaign completed, you're going to move on and really build and implement policies, process, resources, and support that support the initiative, and provide regular updates to your employees and external stakeholders to demonstrate that progress. And in other words, it's like walking the walk. I believe it was Guy who mentioned it earlier, but you know, building ways for your employees to actually engage with your ERGs or other support groups. That is a policy, a system that exists that reinforces and re-engages your workforce into this, into the work. Finally, the fourth thing that you can do is reinforce these policies through those daily practices and business priorities. So this is like, you know, referencing inclusion work in your all hands meetings, and you know, calling your principals front and centers when setting, you know, business strategic objectives, and through your community's through your organization's community involvement, and so on and so forth. So if we go to the next stage, I'll hand this reference over to Kristin. It's her thing, not mine.
I hope I'm not aging myself too much. This is my dad's favorite movie in the world. But I do think it's a really good way to think about how you build these things. If it falls to you in any way to take responsibility for building these things, if you build it, they will come. And what I mean by that is don't wait until your first hire needs accessibility tools. Build it now so it's ready. And that first disability hire feels welcome the first moment they arrive. And then they'll refer all their friends. So now Mercedes is going to start to share the really, really good stuff. The DEI recruiting strategies, building on all of this knowledge we just shared about how important all these pieces are inside of everything. We can switch to the next slide. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, to wrap up, and probably the part that you've all been waiting for is like, how can we bring all this information that we've talked about, that we've learned, and actually apply it to, you know, a DEI recruitment strategy? There are four main ways that this information can be used. However, I want to encourage all of y'all to start thinking about this and putting your answers in the chat right now. But what is the first thing that you can do after this workshop to support your diversity recruitment strategy? Our goal today, you know, was really to empower you all with the necessary and crucial structural and cultural pieces that needs to be in place in order to promote diversity and inclusion. Hopefully now you can use this information to inform your recruitment strategy, not just to find, but also, and more importantly, keep diverse talent that reflects the richness of our community. So a couple of ways that we will be able to use this. The first is by auditing and updating your talent acquisition process for equitability. This might look like things like analyzing your talent acquisition funnel. So everything from source to hire by demographic category to mitigate bias in the interview and application process and ensure that diverse candidates have a fair shot at getting into your organization. Kristin will go ahead and drop, as I continue talking, a couple of other ways to use this information, but I do want to continue hearing from you all. And if you have any other questions, we'll leave some time towards the end to elaborate. The second way you can use this information today is to create custom goals and strategies around the pipelines that you've identified as gaps today. You can make sure that you want to make sure that in identifying those gaps that there is an emphasis for relatability in that strategy. The third thing is you're going to be able to enhance your recruitment marketing through genuine storytelling. Throughout your discovery process or the auditing and assessment process, you're going to identify and gather a plethora of stories from your workforce around the organization and their personal commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and make sure to collect this data and incorporate it into your strategic recruitment marketing initiatives. There's no reason why this can't be, you know, a part of your careers page or a social media campaign, or even a way to tap into new markets. Finally, by accomplishing everything that we've outlined, so all the steps 1 through 3, 1 through 4, and all the slides in each category, and by truly engaging all of your people in this work, you'll be able to develop your diversity pipeline by tapping into your workforce to source candidates. One thing that we often incentivize is recruiting through your employee resource groups. If you want to tap into a particular community, use that community. Your diverse employees that you currently have can also help you create connections and build communities in new ways that you may have not previously penetrated. You'll have access to this information. And there's a plethora of other ways in which you can develop this content and use your employees to further your efforts. So I say all that to say, if you feel like we've thrown a lot of information at you, that you're just hitting the tip of the iceberg today, we really are. There are many more strategies, elaborate technologies and techniques that your organization can employ to increase representation across your business. And we do welcome questions, we welcome feedback, we welcome comments. And so we employ you to think harder on this. We'll drop our contact information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us to continue this conversation and follow up with any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so incredible. And you guys answered the question really, which is like, how can folks get, connected with you? So please, if you learned something in this chat today, feel free to reach out to both Mercedes and Kristin. They are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to recruiting, not just with the DEI lens, but in general. So I hope that this is just the start of your relationship with them. Before everyone leaves, I do have a post-event survey that I would love for you all to answer. This is really helpful for us as we continue to create programming exactly for you guys. So feel free to answer that. And I'll also speak a little bit to our next workshop. It is happening August 31st at 12:30 p.m. and we'll be focusing on microaggressions and their effect on mental health. You really won't want to miss this because, there are things that may be occurring for Black and Brown team members every day that you may want to be aware of. And this conversation will focus on just that. I want to thank Kristin and Mercedes yet again for leading us in this incredible workshop. Please be on the lookout in your email. We'll be sending some of the really valuable information that they shared straight to your inbox, as well as the worksheet as well, if you missed that. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. And yeah, please continue to let us know how we're doing. We'll be doing this every single month. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.